I'm Julia Burton. For our project evaluating silvicultural strategies for restoring American chestnut, we planted transgenic American chestnut seedlings after completing what is called a shelterwood harvest. A shelterwood is a regeneration method that uses a series of timber harvests to create optimal growing conditions for establishing new tree regeneration, and then releasing that regeneration from shading by the overstory once it is well established. There are many variations of shelterwoods, including variation in the number of harvests, the spatial pattern of tree retention, and the amount of overstory trees retained. We implemented what I'm going to call a two-cut shelterwood with variable retention. This starts with an establishment cut that creates optimal growing conditions for tree seedlings. Here we focus on removing a sufficient amount of trees to increase resources for regenerating seedlings in the understory, but not so many trees that we create harsh environmental conditions like temperature extremes or favor competing understory vegetation. So the goal is to open up the canopy enough to allow those seedlings to establish roots and grow above the height of competing plant species. In this experiment, we're looking at 3 alternative residual densities for our establishment cut. A 50% relative density treatment that just includes removal of small understory and midstory trees, and no harvesting. This variation in residual density will allow us to test hypotheses about chestnut's shade tolerance versus ability to grow in high light. Once tree seedlings reach a critical height and are considered free to grow after about 5 to 10 years, they will be released in a subsequent overstory removal cut. Here, a portion of trees may be reserved from the harvest and left uncut if desired. These reserve trees contribute to a more complex aesthetic and function as wildlife habitat, to store carbon, and as a seed source for future generations of trees. Here we'll retain both individual trees as well as some clusters of trees to provide for these important functions. So this is what our shelterwood establishment cut looks like at Lafayette Road. You can see here we've retained enough trees to provide for moderate levels of shade and moderation of temperature extremes by the overstory, as well as some larger openings and higher levels of light transmittance that provide for more resources, allowing trees to potentially grow faster if they're not outcompeted by other plants in the understory. In the background, you can see very dense shade, so that would be our unharvested unit, which would experience lowest levels of competition, but also resources for tree seedlings. So tree seedlings might not be able to survive or grow well in those low light conditions, but they would experience minimal competition there. Here are our blight-resistant chestnuts. These are the Darling 58 transgenic chestnuts developed by Dr. Bill Powell and his group. We planted these shortly after the shelterwood establishment cut was completed. Overall, we expect the results from this research to contribute to our understanding of the niche of American chestnut in the eastern deciduous forest. We'll be able to determine site and overstory conditions required for successful American chestnut planting. And we'll also be able to look at, with additional vegetation control treatments, how much tending will be required to release tree seedlings from competition. Thank you very much for your attention. Please contact me if you have any questions about our project.